This is Bob West, July 1994. I was born December 6, 1913 in Loveland, Colorado. When I was about 3, we moved to a farm about 2 miles outside of town. I lived there until I left home after 2 years of college at Colorado State University. Work on the farm was hard and the luxuries few, but we never went hungry. And that's something, because in those days there were a lot of people that were hungry. This was in the worst part of the Depression. My father and my maternal grandfather both had shops that had hand tools and vices to hold the work. These vices were the same kind that Alvin Linden used. You can see it in one of his pictures in one of his books. There was no money for toy guns, so made my own out of wood. I did not realize it then, but I had the ability to shape what I wanted out of a blank piece of wood or a plank. We had a very good wood shop course in high school, and I took all of those courses that I could. My father had an '86 Winchester 4082 with a broken stock. I somehow talked the shop teacher into allowing me to make a stock for it in the wood shop. It was my first attempt at making a gun stock, and it turned out pretty good. When I was about 7, they planted the first ringneck pheasants on my dad's place and a bunch of other farms around Loveland. By the time I was 15, there were so many, they were a nuisance. An old rooster pheasant will dig up every kernel in a row of corn for 6 feet and never dig an unnecessary hole. It's unbelievable. Two neighbor brothers and I had a grand time hunting the pheasants and ducks along a creek near my home that never froze solid in the winter. It was also a matter of getting them or going hungry. After I quit college, I worked for the Bureau of Reclamation for 2 years in Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. I spent 10 months in the southwest corner of Wyoming. I really got a lot of hunting that year. I had a 30-40 Craig that we could buy through the NRA for $1.50 plus the shipping, come to about $6. I put a Lyman peep sight on it. With a Lyman tong tool, I loaded it up with Highville No. 7 powder and 110 grain bullets. It would shoot like a house afire. There was lots of game up there, and I got more than my share. I found that I would not be able to get anywhere with the Bureau unless I went back to school and got a degree. I was 24 years old and just couldn't see it, so I quit. While trying to get work and go to college, I found that the only way I could get a job on bridges or the big work, I had to join the union as an apprentice carpenter. Anywhere government money or the large jobs were being worked, a union card was a necessity. From the time I quit the Bureau of Reclamation until 1943, I worked as a carpenter in Colorado, Idaho, Arizona, and Kansas. In 1940, I met a girl from Kansas while I was between jobs in Loveland. Also, I had to register for the draft. When they drew the numbers from the fishbowl, I was clear down close to the bottom. The girl from Kansas, my wife of almost 53 years, and I wanted to get married, and so in May 1941, I went to Pocatello, Idaho on a construction job and she went with me, and we got married in Pocatello. It was the best luck I ever had in my life when I met and married her. I worked as a carpenter on defense work until the summer of '43, when the draft called me up for a physical. I had learned about the Navy construction battalions, so I went to see the Navy recruiters, and they took me in as a carpenter's mate second class. That is about the same as a tech sergeant. It gave me a better pay scale to take care of Marion and our unborn son. 2 days after I enlisted, our oldest boy, Larry, was born. I was with him 14 days, and the Navy shipped me to boot camp at Williamsburg, Virginia. Boy, I really realized there was a war on. I saw them for 5 days after advanced training in Rhode Island, and in February they shipped me my outfit overseas. We were shipped on an attack transport from Providence, Rhode Island to Norfolk, Virginia, across the Caribbean, where the subs chased us, through the Panama Canal and over to Pearl Harbor. 23 days. Spent a month at Pearl Harbor and then to Hilo on the Big Island. Done a lot of work on a big Navy air station there. We had too few carpenters and too many machinists and tool makers and so forth. 3 or 4 of us had to train them to do carpenter work. They shipped my crew to the island of Maui to finish the inside of a huge Quonset hut for the Waves Barracks. In April '45, they shipped my outfit to Kwajalein. There, our job was to build an airstrip for the B-29s to land and refuel on their way to the Marianas to bomb Japan. We built a 6,600-foot airstrip and all the other facilities necessary to serve the air transport. We even tried to drive a 40-foot steel sheet pile through a 1,000-pound skip bomb while building a larger dock. Scared the hell out of a lot of people. The Navy had shelled the island for 8 days, and the Marines had taken it, and the ground was full of rusty live ammunition of all kinds. Had some real thrillers, and lost 2 men to old ammunition and hand grenades. All the time I was in the service, Marion bought gun books such as Baker and Vickery and sent them to me. I also got acquainted with several machinists and tool makers in our outfit. I made up my mind I wanted to try and be a gunsmith, but I realized I needed some machine shop training. Since I was 31 years old and had Marion and Larry at home, I was in the second bunch to be sent home to be discharged. I was discharged in California in November 1945. Marion and Larry had lived with her folks in Kansas while I was gone. I had not seen them for 25 months, and we had a wonderful reunion there, and then come back to Colorado to my folks. We visited friends in Pueblo, Colorado, and while there, a guy I knew offered me a job in his sporting goods store. I repaired guns and clerked and done anything needed. It also gave me a chance to go to Pueblo Junior College at night in their machine shop school. I could not leave work, get home and eat, and back to the school in time. I was always late, and all the lathes and mills would be taken. One night the teacher took me over to a brand new Monarch lathe. It was a 16-inch swing with a 12-foot bed. The chucks were 18 inches in diameter and 4 inches thick, and weighed about 150 pounds. It just plain scared the hell out of me, but the teacher showed me how to run it, and I was off and running. Cutting 40 threads to the inch on it was a cinch, and I'll bet I could have made a balance staff or a watch with it. We lived there 18 months, and I got 4,800 hours credit in the shop classes. It has sure been a fine training for me. I think every gunsmith should go to a machine shop course of some kind and learn how to run a lathe and a mill. It's not really that hard. While working there, my boss and I went to Trinidad. It was about 75 miles to visit P.O. Ackley. He and Ward Coosier had worked in the small arms shop at Ogden Arsenal under Hatcher. It was Fred Barnes, Adair, Pfeiffer, Keith, and a bunch of other gunsmiths. When the war in Europe ended, Ackley and Coosier quit and went to Cimarron, New Mexico, and started a barrel making shop. Ackley had had a barrel shop in Roseburg, Oregon, before the war. They were in Cimarron about 6 months and then moved to Trinidad, Colorado, and bought a bunch of war surplus barrel making machinery. When my boss and I went to see them, they were set up in an automobile garage which covered about a quarter of a city block in downtown Trinidad. They were working about 20 people and had more work than they could do. As we walked down the street to the front door, we got a shock. Behind a big plate glass window, a guy was turning a barrel in a lathe wearing a dress suit, white shirt, and a tie. Of course, no one else was dressed like that. We found out that the guy was Herb Longo and that he was renting a space to work. Aki was full of Longo stories. I did not get to meet Coosier then. He was in the hospital with polio. I met him in Salt Lake City several years later. He spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair and made a living reboring, relining, and doing barrel work. He was good. Naturally, I got the idea that there was gobs of work available. In 1948, I bought a place in Loveland and started a gun shop. I bought a Sears Atlas lathe and some chain reamers. I used Ackley and Buemiller barrels. I soon found out the town was too small to support a shop, and outside work was hard to get by an unknown. Ackley had been in the business quite a while and also got a lot of publicity on his blow-up tests on military rifles. I had to work part-time as a carpenter to keep food on the table. I did learn a lot about stock making. Leonard Muse had a cousin who lived in Loveland named Count Mashi. Count got me to let Muse make him a stock in my shop. In about 4 or 5 days, I learned more about stock making and Smith tool making than I had ever dreamed of. Muse taught me to make checkering tools and a lot about using them. Muse was working for Weatherby and just stopped in Loveland to visit Count. They were both from Wisconsin. He had learned a lot from Shellhammer, Linden, and Emil Koshalik. This Emil Koshalik was considered one of the best metalworkers of his time. By that time, we had 3 children, and I needed a job that brought in a steady income. They needed a shop teacher in the Trinidad gun school. Ackley sicked them on me, and I took the job and moved to Trinidad in August of '49. The school was in the Trinidad Junior College. Ackley taught a lecture class 1 hour a day, and I had 3 second-year shop classes. His barrel shop had been moved and was in a large building about 4 miles from town. They employed about 25 people. They had a bunch of large Pratt & Whitney barrel making machines. He had a lot of correspondence to answer, and he turned the outside on all the barrels that they made in 2 big lathes. He also had a rebore set up. He would work from 8 a.m. until 9 or 10 at night for about 6 weeks or so, whatever it was. And then he'd pull up stakes and go to California or Washington or Timbuktu for several days. Just completely quit even thinking about the work. He'd visit quite a lot of gun shops and got acquainted with people, and it probably paid off. I enjoyed teaching the shop course and learned more than most of the students. When they asked questions, I had to know the answer or find it. I made it a practice to never lie. If I didn't know, I said so. Actor was a big help. Also, 95% of the students were ex-GIs, and I was, and so was I, and that helped. Several of the students were better mechanics than I was. I taught at Trinidad 2 years until Ackley sold the plant to Easton Engineering, and the plant was moved to Salt Lake City. I never did know exactly why he sold it, but I always thought it was because the partners would not go along with borrowing money to set up and make the controlled expansion bullets. He and Coosier controlled 51% of the stock, and Coosier would let him vote it, whatever he wanted, so he could have forced them to do it, but he didn't want to do that. He also didn't seem to want to have a shop of any size or any amount of people working in it. He was pretty much of a loner. These controlled expansion bullets were just like a Nosler solid base, except that they were made out of soft copper wire and opened up more reliably than the Nosler. At that time, the Nosler was made out of too hard a material. They still are pretty hard, I think. My customers are of 2 definite opinions about Nosler bullets. They either hate them or love them, and there's no in between, it don't seem like. I think if they hit something hard enough and open up good, they're a real good bullet. But if they don't hit something, if they go in between the ribs, they won't open up. They just bore a hole right on through, and you don't get your game. I hear complaints one way, and then somebody was telling how wonderful they are, so you'll have to make up your mind about that. Easton offers a bunch of us work, and 14 of us went with the plant. It was a mistake. None of us would get along with Easton. He fired Ackley and Bill Atkinson after 8 months, and several others quit. I was too poor to get out of town. Ackley had seen the writing on the wall and started accumulating a shop at home. When Easton fired him, he was ready to start producing barrels. In less than 2 weeks, the grapevine had carried the news, and Ackley was in business. He built a machine that would drill, ream, and rifle a barrel without removing it from the chucks. It could be done with a minimum of tool changing. My rifling machine is almost an exact copy of it. I worked for Easton a year and quit and went to work for Ackley. I stayed with him 4 years and learned a lot about barrel work. If he only taught me one thing, which was how to make and temper half reamers, it was worth it all. He also taught me to make chambering reamers and to heat treat them with a torch. Of course, I learned a lot more from him and met a lot of the gunsmiths and gun people and got to see their work. In 1956, our youngest boy got pneumatic fever, and I became aware that I had to get a job at better wages and with hospitalization for all of us available. In December 56, I got a chance to go to work for Martin Aircraft in the Titan missile plant in the tool and die shop in Littleton, Colorado, and I took it. We moved to Littleton and bought a home. The job worked out fine, and my gun work stood me in good stead. Our house had a full basement, and I set a shop up in part of it and done gun work part-time. I had a 10-inch Logan lathe, welder, and a drill press, and a bunch of small tools. I am left-handed and needed a bolt action that was left-handed. I happened to see a Springfield that Sedgley had converted to left hand. I got a Springfield action and converted it to left hand. It worked out fine, and Jack O'Connor gave me a plug for it in Outdoor Life. That gave me a specialty job. Eventually, I converted to Springfield and also Model 52, 54, and 70 Winchester and Remington 721 and 722. I've done this from 1956 to 1963. Charles Askins and some others wrote me up after I worked on their guns, and I had all the work I could do in my spare time. I learned early in working on guns you have to say no to certain work and stay with it. For instance, converting 03 Springfields and 1917 Enfields to Magnum was one example. They were fine for the 06, but I did not think the barrel steel was strong enough, and the 03 wasn't large enough to stand the bigger cartridges, and refused to chamber them. Paul Marquardt found to his sorrow that the Enfield was not strong enough. He almost lost a hand when one blew up. When the 110 Savage came out in a left-hand model, the left-hand conversion work dropped to practically nothing. I had been thinking about it, so I took the time and built me a racking machine and a bunch of tooling for it. It was almost an exact copy of the one that Ackley made. On it, I could counterbore, ream, and rifle a barrel with a minimum of setup and tool changing. I was lucky to have been with Ackley and learned how to make the tooling. Cost to have a machine and grinding shop make the tooling would have been prohibitive. I did not set up to drill barrels from the bars. Cost of buying enough barrel steel to get a decent price is too great. Interest on $5,000 or more raises your cost. Reboring and relining gave me plenty of work. I also fitted and chambered custom barrels and made a few stocks, but gradually eased into the metalwork and away from the stocks. I had a small milling machine and made most of my reamers and counterbores. I finally settled down to removing about 50 thousandths at a pass of metal at a pass as I went up in caliber or bored out for a liner. In about 1968, one of my boys was out of work, so I put him to work making a reaming machine. It is set up with a power feed that will go very slow. Chips coming out of it are just as fine as clay dirt and it really does a good job. Oil is fed through the reamers to cool them and to bring out the chips. Even working part-time, the gun business worked out okay. I didn't try to do bluing because I don't like it, and I couldn't do it in the house. I can polish all day on wood and enjoy it, but I hate to polish metal. I didn't work on pistols because my boys and their friends were always around, and it worried my wife and I. Our oldest boy moved to Oregon, and we visited and liked the country and the climate. When I was nearing 62 in 1974, I decided to take an early retirement, and we quit our jobs and moved to Eugene, Oregon. I set up my shop and ended up with a complete metal working shop. I fit custom barrels, rebore and reline barrels, and make a complete rifle now and then. Stockware is secondary to the metal work. Anyone who is trying to make a living doing only custom stocks has a rough road to hoe. Having to wait on metal workers, blue men, heat treaters, and engravers will drive you nuts. Also, it splits the income. I have even set up one of my lathes with tracers so I can turn my own barrels, because I hate to wait a month or so for barrel makers to turn the contours on the barrels. I like to keep my work so I can deliver in 3 or at most 4 months. I think quick delivery is a must. I know it is costly to set up for metal work. My tool and machine inventory is $25,000. That's a lot compared to the $500 to $1,000 to make stocks. My rifler and reamer are about $10,000 of the inventory. And one thing I want to make clear: I do not think I'm the best workman in the world or the smartest. I can make a stock from a blank and make my own checkering tools and checker it, and it will come out like I want it, and it will be reasonably good. I make my own tools for rifling and reaming barrels. I have fitted and chambered several thousand barrels and turned the outside of most of them. I re-rifle, reline, and fit about 150 barrels a year. I do most of it on a little 10-inch swing, 54-inch Logan lathe. I also have a 11-inch Logan that is a little bit longer, and it has a big hole in the headstock, and it comes in real handy. But it don't turn barrels anywhere near as good as the little one does for some reason, and I don't know what it is. The little one has a flap belt, and you can set it to slip if a reamer catches. I think an average guy can learn to run a lathe and mill with a little instructions and help. I don't use roughing reamers, probably because I was too poor to buy them. A twist drill is quicker. I hold the reamers in my hand with a lathe dog on the reamer so I can release it if it hangs up. I set up the lathe in a steady rest on the threads and use the reamer with a set in the tailstock. Use the little lathe almost entirely for turning and chambering. It cost $750 in 1955, and I would not sell it for 5 times that much. I only use go gauges to chamber. It's too easy to get go and no gauges mixed up and cut too deep. A piece of ordinary writing paper is 3/1000 and just right to put between the bolt face and the gauge. I use 2-inch diameter split steel blocks to hold barrels in my barrel vise. They are contoured to fit the barrel OD, and I put poster paper which is about 23/1000 thick and salt between the bushing and the barrel. Sugar, not salt. And they hold good. I know you say they will crush and crease the. Of course they will if they don't fit. That's why I have 20 or 5 or 30 sets. I also have heavy steel action wrenches. They are a must. I test fire every barrel I fit with factory ammunition and keep the fired cases with the customer's name on it. The main problem with barrel fitting is the customer who hand loads. A large percentage of them don't know what they're doing and load too hot and have trouble. Joe Blow buys him a loading outfit and just sits up and half reads a book and starts to load, and he comes out with some real good loads and is just dumb blind lucky. He tells his buddy Johnny, well, there's nothing to it, just go down and buy you a loading outfit and start in. The next thing you know, Johnny's blowing primers and he's in trouble and he's blaming the barrel man. The last few years, the factories have become very careless with their headspace on their ammunition, especially the belted magnums. I have some 338 Magnum Winchester ammunition that is 11 to 13,000 short on the belts. All are at least 6,000 under. I check all bolt bearing surfaces and actions with a carbide scriber. On setting headspace, the last few years I've got to the point where I set all headspace tight on a go gauge. Not only the belted magnums, but the 06 type. They are inclined to be a little short also. If the carbide scriber cuts there are too soft. I also want the lugs on the bolt to bear evenly on the receiver surfaces. If not, I lap them in. I don't give a damn if the bolt face is square. All you have to do is set up a bunch of cases up on a piece of plate glass and see how crooked they are. I think by the time the case moves back to the bolt and the bolt to the recesses, everything tightens up, the bullet is down the barrel. I like the 98 Mauser actions and Enfield actions best for hot loads because the threads are large. The strength is in the barrel, not in the action. If a chamber is overloaded and starts to swell, the size of the threads determines how much it's going to swell. And if it swells enough, it'll break in action. I don't care how an action feeds for guns used in America. Those for use against dangerous game should have a controlled feed like a Mauser, Springfield, Enfield, and Model 70. Also for dangerous game, I also prefer 300 and 300 H&H because they have long sloping case and they feed good all the time. Don't care whether it's upside down or straight up or crossways, they still feed all the time. The straight bodies, sharp-shouldered cases don't feed reliably. Just when you need them, they jam on you. I've had quite a lot of customers complain about that. I turn and thread my barrels between center on the lathe. I like to thread so that I can just turn the action to the barrel onto the barrel by hand. I make the last pass across the top of the threads so I can use them in the steady rest to chamber. This leaves a flat surface true with the bore. I usually stone commercial reamers slightly so they cut slightly smaller to give a tight chamber. I also don't use a 3-foot wrench to tighten a barrel to the action. I have heavy wooden blocks for my vise with a 3/4 hole through them. I tighten the barrel in the blocks and give the action a sharp rap with a 16-ounce hammer and a 3/4 diameter bronze bar. If I use an action wrench, I spin it and snap it to the action to bring it up tight. These wooden blocks are very handy. I use them to hold barrels when I'm setting up headspace and can even use them when making a stock. I don't draw file the outside of barrels. I use a file and sand with an expanding drum sander. I hold the barrel between live centers. Getting a barrel without a bunch of waves in it is just a matter of practice. Another problem the barrel man has is some individuals and some writers. They and some of their buddies draw up a new cartridge design that has been tried and abandoned years ago, or is slightly different. They blow it up like it was better than sliced bread and a cinch to make. Of course, they aren't making the tooling to the tune of $200 or $300 to pay or paying for it. You're supposed to be glad to do all that. They will have all their friends get one and talk it up or write it up and get you a lot of business. It takes at least 6 jobs to even start to pay for a set of chambering reamers and gauges. You just have to learn to say no. A lot of the writers don't know sickum about what they write. Like the one who was writing on barrel steel. He said stainless was better except it was harder to machine than moly. Stainless is easier to turn in a machine. You just have to be careful to not turn it too small between centers without a steady rest in the center. Stainless is soft and will warp if you're not careful. It's just a real tough material, not a hard material, and it can't be tempered too hard. Cartridge and caliber design are like clothes fashions. They go by about every 25 years. Lott found his 450 Lott and blew it up. All was his idea. It was just a 450 actually that was developed in the 40s and 50s, or probably Mashburn had it about then too. I don't work for trap shooters, although I shoot quite a lot of trap. They want their work set ahead of everyone else because they have a shoot in 3 days and have to have the gun. They probably have 4 or 5 at home they could use, but they just have to have that one. I also won't work for bench resters. The Lord himself couldn't suit them. I don't honestly think any barrel maker, including Hart, has a corner on barrel accuracy. Some may be better than others, but like Coogee used to say, they all shoot better than I can. If a barrel tack holds the first 3 and then throws a couple of flyers, and just throw it away. It has a stress in it, and when it heats up, it makes walks, and nothing will come cure it. That is why I don't think 3-shot groups are worth the paper they're shot into. I like cut rifle barrels better than hammer forged or button rifle, but I can't prove it. I can't prove that they're better. I don't like Weatherby chambers because the excess free bores makes the group open up, and I believe I can prove it. I don't think the number of grooves has anything to do with accuracy. All it does is spin the bullet. The twist is sometimes critical. Also the crown on the barrel. If a barrel suddenly becomes inaccurate, the first place I check is the crown. When reboring, I like going from 30-06 to 35 Whelen. I use neck reamers. I make them myself, and I'm very careful to make the neck large enough to free the bullet when fired. A tight neck will raise pressures instantly. Also, you want the neck deep enough so that if the shell neck moves ahead, it won't crimp. I think anyone who is reloading rifle shells should have an outside neck trimmer and use it. The bench resters say it also improves accuracy. Reboring is an entirely different business. I was lucky to have had the opportunity to work with Ackley and later teach with Ackley and later work for him, and that way learned the business. You had to be able to make the tools to ream and rifle barrels, and I even made the machines for it. You can't buy rifling heads, so you just have to make them. I made mine out of tool steel and hardened them and then had them ground, and after 25 years they're not worn enough to show. You need a milling machine to flute reamers and counterbores and to cut lots of metal quick, like going from 22 caliber to 35 Whelen or 45-70. Ackley also taught me how to harden small counterbores and larger chambering mirrors with a torch, which saved me a lot of expense. It's quite expensive to set up to rebore or reline. I have a rifling machine and a reaming machine and an all-in tooling for them. Lately I've been able to buy some barrel reamers that work good. I use a scrape cutter in rifling because my machine is hand powered, and also because you are working on so many different steels. For instance, 45 caliber, the old 86 Winchesters, high walls, low walls, sharps, and so forth were made of soft steel, but that same cutter must cut modern moly or stainless steel. With a power machine, a hook cutter can be used. You cannot button rifle them because they are tapered and the spring back would not be the same the full length of the barrel. You have to be careful because you have to have, I think, at least 10 thousandths on the side above the depths of the bottom of the grooves to cut to the next caliber up. For instance, you can't go from 270 to 7 mm because the bottom of the grooves are deeper than the bore for the 7 mm. Also, you have to have enough metal for your counterbores and reamers to catch, not jump. If you try to get too close, it will chatter on you, and the chatter will follow the old rifling, and it's a funny looking barrel when you get through with it. Relining can be done on any good lathe. The step drill will take care of will take the metal to the diameter necessary for the liner, and you can turn the liner to fit. We used to put liners in with soft solder, and it would take me 4 to 6 hours to install 2 after the barrel and liner were turned and bored. With a modern epoxy, I can install 4 in an hour or an hour and a half, and they stay. On small ones, you could probably use Loctite, maybe even on the big ones, I don't know. I usually leave the inside of the old barrel rough, and also the outside of the liner rough, so that I get a better adhesion. The epoxy that I use has powdered metal in it, so you have to have between 5 and 10 thousandths between the liner and the bore. Some of the self-appointed experts will tell you a liner destroys the value of an antique gun. How do they explain that the old mercury primers just eat up barrels, and those old boys simply put in liners? They used to put a small brass wedge at the muzzle in to center the liner, and the little brass ring showed it was lined. They were proud of their liner jobs, and I am of mine. In Ned Roberts' book, he says that Brockway, who made some of the most accurate slug guns in the world, said that rebored or relined barrels shot the best. Brockway should have known. Learning how to make the tools and sharpen them is one of the expenses in time and material in the reboring part of the business. A little about ethics in the business as I see it. I have on my price sheet that reboring is to be done at the owner's risk. You're working with a used barrel most times, and it may be full of rust, dirt, and all kinds of crud, so that it may break a tool and ruin the barrel. It may also be any other thing that ruins the customer's property. I feel that if it is all possible, the gunsmith should replace it at no cost to the customer. Also, absolute honesty at all times. Also, fast service is a must. Having to wait a year or two for a job is usually poor for your business. If you can't get the work done in a reasonable time, you better get into another business. I know that there are a few expert workmen who are a year or so behind, but there are not very many of them. Also, you have to watch for the jobs that or can become monsters and simply refuse to do them. And again, I say, learn to say no. Thank you.